Being a direct sequel to Do You Copy, a watchtower genre of game where the park ranger has to assist a lost hiker to safety, the story continues with a park ranger getting a call from a distressed mother who explains her son, Michael Leeds, has gone missing after he went to the Gracewind National Park, begging the ranger to help find him.
Hello? I need your help. I need you to find my son, Michael. I think he went out to Gracewind Park. Please, you have to find him.
The ranger knows within himself that this would be another lost cause, as anyone who goes missing in the park never gets found, or if they do, they are not usually alive anymore. This is something many of the park rangers have grown accustomed to over the past several months or years, as it appears to be a common occurrence which they cannot find the cause of. Listening to a talk radio channel, the caller explains how he was hunted in one of his visits to the Gracewind Park, which is consistent with the rumors going around that a supernatural serial killer, better known as the Goatman, who has the ability to mimic people's voice, was the cause of it all. The terrifying encounter with the Goatman was observed in the last game, which I made a video about, that he not only has the ability to mimic people's voices perfectly, but he is very intelligent and uses this ability to his advantage to play mind games with his victims, playing with them before killing them for the thrills. As it turns out, Michael was a convict who went to prison accused for killing his friends in a camping trip back in 1970s, now being fresh out of prison after 2 decades. It doesn't take long for Michael to go missing after visiting Gracewind, someone who is in his 50s. This time around, the disappearance is stranger than other cases, as he receives a call from someone in a panic saying that he's Michael in Gracewind before the call ends, which the ranger tries to dismiss as a prank call or a wrong number, but his guts tell him otherwise, which intrigues his curiosity to go out of his way looking for Michael. As he sets out on his way, he finds a stolen ranger's vehicle crashed in front of an old cabin which is not marked on the maps. Things becoming more bizarre and intriguing, the ranger explores the cabin, finding notes dating back to 19th century, displaying how old the history of Gracewind is, and also its mythical folklores and series of disappearances. Many disappearances have happened here, which many created supernatural stories about, and some dismissed as mere carelessness. But something no one can explain is what was the cause of their disappearance. Exploring the cabin further, the ranger finds notes about someone writing journals about an imaginary entity they refer to as their angel, calling them Eurydice. Despite the parents and the townsfolk turning their back against this person as if they were different or had mental difficulties, the author explains how the isolation wasn't that bad with this angel. Over time, lost strangers would appear at the doorstep of this isolated individual whom she would help, strangers who have all been hurt, which caused Eurydice to get angry and slowly show her true colors of how impatient she is, and even threatening this individual if they would ever betray them, they would face the consequences. As years go on, after 3 decades, the author grows tired of Eurydice seemingly being separated from each other, now saying that she hates her. Eventually, in 1909, 3 decades after being together, this imaginary being that no one believes to be real leaves a wailing, dirty, unusual baby at her doorstep, which the author cannot bring herself to abandon and decides to raise, despite not seeing herself as a mother. As years go on, with this child growing unusually strong and different, being able to mimic creatures' sounds, the author names him Philip. As years pass on, the author gets many more visits from strangers coming to her doorstep, which the author claims to know are Eurydice's doing, which leads to Philip scaring the strangers off, even at such a young age, which the author tries to dissuade from doing so as it only makes things worse. Finding more notes, it's revealed the author was abused by the father all the time, having her head submerged under the lake water to the point of passing out, to the point of death. But then the mother's bell would ring and the father would carry her back. The father believed his own daughter, the author of these notes, to grow up to be a witch, hence why he tried drowning her all the time. This goes on for a while, up until a point where the author cannot withstand the pain anymore, pushing the father into the lake, which leads to the father dying. As it's evident from the notes, the author seemed to have mental difficulties, not understanding what drowning is, describing it as a fiery feeling that she gets from the water, and not even understanding why the father does that. This leads to the author becoming friends with a being no one believed to be real, an entity the author called Eurydice, which seemed to be a witch, as she took away the author's eyes, bringing many strangers to her doorstep who were hurt, which would explain these strangers were whether people who wanted some sort of a witchcraft done or the victims of disappearances. The author even explains without the ability of sight, she saw a different world, being muddy and dark, still having vision. This further explains why she was isolated and excommunicated from the community, as they saw her as a witch in the cabin, not believing there's another entity called Eurydice manipulating her, an entity the author explains to have saved her from the lake. Therefore, it seems Eurydice, if real, is a supernatural entity, a witch from the lake who manipulated the author to work with her and do her biddings. As time goes by, the author notices and hears how Eurydice is drowning children in the lake. Despite unsuccessful tries of the author trying to save the children from drowning, the townsfolk believe her to be the culprit, hence why trying to get rid of her, yet being scared of her. This causes the author slowly understanding Eurydice is anything but an angel, not such a pure being after all, yet not comprehending why she would save her from the lake. More and more items found within the cabin depict this place belonged to the author, which is evident was used for witchcraft. The ranger then comes across a hatch locked with many chains when the voice of a woman begging for help emits, urging the ranger to let her out. When the ranger tries to do so, performing some rituals but failing to unlock the last chain, the woman explains that he fell for her tricks and she will now possess his body, as her own current body is in a bad shape, which might be a hint that she is Eurydice, who is someone with supernatural abilities being able to live this long. That's when the ranger blacks out and finds himself back outside the cabin, with it being night now and raining. Going back into the cabin to investigate the strange occurrences and the terrifying experience he just had, he tries to reopen the hatch and see what really is underneath, questioning if what happened before was real or just a figment of his imagination, as after all, he is still in control of his body and he didn't see anyone apart from hearing voices. Finding more notes, it's revealed when more and more people visit the isolated woman in the cabin. They all started screaming and shouting and calling Philip a monster and the author a witch, blaming her for all the disappearances, when she suddenly has enough, telling Philip to scare them away, when the people, in fear and retaliation, killed the innocent Philip, who at this time would be only 9 or 10 years old. The pain and anguish of losing Philip, someone she saw as her child, raising him all on her own, she makes a vow to make Eurydice and people responsible for his death pay the price. Another note, which is a police report, expands on Michael's arrest and his own accounts of the camping trip that he had with his friends. He explains how he went camping with 3 of his friends, Caitlin, Cliff, and David, who all started disappearing in strange manners one by one. First, it was David who vanished from the campfire after everyone fell asleep, with no sign of him ever taking anything with him. Caitlin and Michael go to search for him in the woods, leaving Cliff behind. As they return, they see a shell-shocked Cliff muttering as if he has seen a ghost, explaining he heard David screaming. They try to sleep the night as they become exhausted mentally and physically looking for David, when at the dead of night, they hear David screaming again, which leads to Cliff running into the woods like a madman, as if guilty for not being able to save David. But this unfortunately leads to Cliff disappearing as well. Michael and Caitlin go after him to find him, hearing his voice emitting from everywhere and surrounding them, walking for hours on end, but instead stumble upon the cabin in the woods, seemingly the one that the ranger is in right now. Being in a derelict state, Michael instructs Caitlin to stay outside while he goes to check inside. But as he comes out, not finding anything of interest, he observes Caitlin being gone, not even hearing a word. Despite pleading his innocence and never admitting he's guilty, the authorities don't believe Michael and imprison him, which led to him going back to the Gracewind once again for some reason, disappearing for good now himself. repeating the same events yet again, feeling as if he is trapped in a loop he cannot leave. The woman in the hatch explains that he is cursed and trapped just like her, which might explain that she might not be Eurydice but another trapped victim who went missing, and she refers to another woman in the hatch, saying it's all tricks, which could mean Eurydice could in fact be there mimicking the voice of the victim. Trying to unlock the chains and failing again, the ranger gets attacked by a supernatural entity who happens to be the goatman, who kills him instantly with the loop repeating. This time around, the ranger tries to abandon the cabin, walking through what seems like a portal gate which leads to the goatman chasing after him, completely lost in a different surreal, unending version of the woods. This leaves the protagonist with only one option: to complete all the rituals to escape this tormenting loop. This time around, managing to open all the chains, a different woman explains that she didn't want any of this to happen and didn't want to hurt anyone, referring to another woman wanting to get into the real world and wreak havoc, who she tried to stop, saying that she tried to stop her claws from reaching the world and hurting others. That's when, in a disappointed, embarrassed tone, she explains she only needed a body to escape, which transforms the world, with the ranger managing to leave the loop into a sunny woods. So this in a way explains that the author of the notes was seemingly trapped with Eurydice, whom she used as a vessel or an instrument to hurt others and perform witchcraft. Someone whom she managed to use to access her own alternate world and real world, as the author explained, to be able to see a muddy world despite having no vision. It's a possibility Michael wanted to go back to the park after decades of wandering, with the thought eating at him to where his friends went, not caring much about dying anymore, as he had suffered enough. He probably went to the cabin just to disappear, to find out what happened to his friends and what was the source of the sound that mimicked their voices. Most likely Eurydice was the root cause of all the people disappearing and vanishing, somehow trying to possess their bodies so she can enter the real world. And that's what happened towards the end, with the protagonist becoming possessed. Therefore, Eurydice was a real entity that somehow managed to communicate with the author of the notes and access the real world through her, to the point where she killed many, trying to possess someone to manifest an existence for herself in the real world from whatever dimension she was from. As she says, she simply wanted to live. Also, we see the goatman in flesh appearing and chasing after the ranger. Is it possible the goatman is in fact Philip? In the notes we read how Philip had an unusual look to him, which the townsfolk called a monster, and he had a remarkable ability of mimicking sounds, starting from mimicking the sounds of birds. So maybe he is the supernatural manifestation which has turned into the goatman, making many hikers disappear, possessing supernatural abilities sourced by Eurydice, doing her biddings and being used as an instrument. Therefore, the sequel explains how the goatman was able to make all the people disappear, and it expands on the story on how the lake or the cabin was a gateway to a surreal world which many victims possibly got lost in, an alternate world which they walked around aimlessly and got lost. Either way, the game was really confusing, and the only way we could learn about the lore was finding and reading the long notes. What are your thoughts about the lore? Let me know down in the comment section below. As always, it's been your host Star, and I will see you on the next video. Take care.